Good morning, and grace and peace to you. Dawn, thank you for the songs. I think you had help with picking those out. Very good. And thank you for your singing. I love that first one of my favorites. And the second one where God says he will make it all plain. I know a lot of us are waiting for that. Exactly, Lord, why did you do it this way? And that's a little bit the story of Joseph, isn't it? We're going to start in Genesis 41. Before we jump to that, though, remember, as Rick prayed, Thanksgiving this week, and I think most of us get together as family to, if you will, celebrate that holiday. Just remember that it is a day of thanksgiving, to thank our Almighty God for every blessing, every good thing. The food, not just the food on the table, but the family and health and the gift of his son, is still appropriate on Thanksgiving Day. I remember a thought, and I forget where I read it. What a sad time it is for an atheist. When they have been blessed, they have good fortune, if you want to use that term, something's really going good in their life, and they have that feeling inside that they want to be thankful, but they have no one to thank. Just something to consider. We've talked about that before. Anyway. So we've been with Joseph now for 4 weeks. Joseph had to wait a lot longer than 4 weeks for him to be blessed by God. Well, he was blessed all the time, but for him to get out of the bad circumstances. The quick review, we left Joseph in the prison. We know the encounter he had with Potiphar's wife, and he got slandered and thrown in the prison. The chief cupbearer and chief baker had the dreams. He interpreted them with God's help, of course. And the cupbearer was to be restored to his place at Pharaoh, with Pharaoh. And he said to the cupbearer, "Please remember me. I was kidnapped and I shouldn't be down here. And when I came to Egypt, I was kind of railroaded, and I'm here and for nothing I've done." But when the cupbearer was restored, the dream came true as Joseph interpreted it. The chief cupbearer forgot him. And he languished another 2 years in Potiphar's prison. As we've been trying to emphasize this, especially for young people as we're starting out, that life has many ups and downs, twists and turns, and things don't always go the way you'd like for them to. We have to interact with a lot of people. Some of them will be good for us, some will be true to us, and some of them will not. And we have to be ready to deal with these situations, but always understand that God is with us, God is watching over, and he's going to bring out the good in the end. And that's a great deal of the story of Joseph here. Actually, I'm going to start in Genesis 41 and 9, because the Pharaoh, if you remember, has had his dreams, and they're very disturbing. They must have been very real, almost like nightmares. He says, these mean something. He called his magicians together, his soothsayers, and they, as we said last time, were very honest. They said, "Pharaoh, we can't interpret them." So we gave them credit. They didn't try to, tell a lie. They said, "We don't know what it means." And then the cupbearer finally remembers. He says, oh. What does that say in verse 9? Spoke to Pharaoh, saying, "I would make mention today of my own offenses or sins." In other words, he forgot. He forgot Joseph. So then he tells the story that there's a young Hebrew in prison who related my dream, and it came true. And then Pharaoh grabs onto that. Verse 14. Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Joseph has rushed into Pharaoh's presence, coming out of that dingy prison where he was, in fact, over all the prisoners. We saw God was even with him there. Got him shaved. And I just wrote a little funny down here. I said, wonder if he cut himself shaving. You know, hurry up, get up. The Pharaoh wants to see you. You know how it is sometimes. Anyway, but of course, Joseph credits God with the interpretation of the dreams. He always gave God the glory. And there again is a lesson for you and me. Do we always give God the glory? That it's not me. It's not just my skills, my talents, my intelligence. Yes, God has given those to you, but do you remember that, and do you give God the glory and say, well, God has blessed me and that I'm able to, you know, fix cars or bake cakes, or I can read really well, or I can teach, that this is a skill that God has given me. Joseph, as we've said, was an amazing young man, a man of God. Verse 17. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, in my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. And so he relates the dreams. Let's read them. Behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I'd never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them. They were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I saw also in my dream, and behold, 7 ears, that would be of grain, full and good, came up on a single stalk, and lo, 7 ears withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. And then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. And again, some very strange dreams. We know that Joseph has had his dreams. Again, very vivid, very real. We talked about dreams a little bit more last time. But the Pharaoh is saying, these must mean something. I need to know what these dreams mean. So, verse 25, God is again with Joseph in the interpretation of dreams. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. So God has a plan. He always does. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. So God is working something, and will be working something in the next 14 years, not only in Egypt, but in all the world. He has a plan. He's headed somewhere. He always has a plan. We can never outthink God or get ahead of God. We just absolutely cannot. He is so far ahead of us. We've said this before. He doesn't waste time, and he doesn't waste energy. Sometimes we do wonder why he does it this way. If you remember the story, Abraham, God called Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees. He says, Abraham, I want you to go to another land here, and I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to give it to you and your descendants. And so Abraham gets up and he leaves and he goes. He basically does that, follows God. Now, what God is working here through Joseph is to get the children of Israel, basically Jacob and his family, down into Egypt. And we might ask the question, well, why didn't he just go to Jacob and say, Jacob, I want you to pick up everything you have here and take your whole family to Egypt? But he didn't do that. And I can't answer why. I might have some guesses at that, but he didn't do it that way. He's doing it this way through Joseph and through this famine. So God has his reasons why he does some things some way and then some things another way. And we just cannot figure God out at times. We just have to accept. Verse 29, behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. So now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now we might ask again, why the famine? Won't that cause suffering? Sometimes God allows suffering, doesn't he? You know, today we have our climatologists and our meteorologists all over the place, not only on TV, but in the internet, everywhere, predicting the weather for us. Why it happens, you know, we have bomb cyclones, heat domes, occluded fronts, troughs, all these other things. Well, that's great that they can figure these out. They have names for all of these things. But they would never dare say, God did it. I have yet to hear any meteorologist say that. They might refer to Mother Nature, whoever that is. I've yet to meet her. What about us, though? We Christians who know, yes, God has set these things in motion, but we also know God's hand is still in everything going on this planet. Do we ever credit God with the weather? Do we ever pray to God about the weather? When we had these recent drought conditions, did you pray to God that it might rain? Or did you think we were just stuck here until something just happened so it would all change? Sometimes we really need to rethink our faith and who we are. We tend to forget, you know, the world just piles it on us, and we just kind of tend to absorb it and just think it's that way. And that's why we have to keep going back to the book to remember who is here, who's in charge, that there is a creator. He does have his hand over everything. Christ is upholding everything by the word of his power. If he chose not to do that, it would all end. We just have to remember these things. Anyway. But Joseph says God will quickly bring this about. So we better get busy, right? Because this is going to start right away. Back to the famine idea, you know, God does allow suffering. He's been allowing Joseph to have suffering, right? Yes, kidnapped, sold into slavery, into prison. He's been suffering. Even though God's been with him, it's not good. It's not a great place to be. But God has a remedy for this famine that he's going to send. You see, God is not just dumping this on the people and saying, you're all going to suffer and die. Verse 33. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let them exact a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Here's the remedy. God's telling them how you can be ready for this famine that is going to come. Where did this entire plan come from? God has given Joseph the interpretation of the dream, but it is God that also gives Joseph this remedy for the famine. Where did the 1/5 come from? Who would have known that saving up 1/5 of the grain every year would be enough to protect against the 7 years of famine? Only God would know that. And he gave that to Joseph, and Joseph is the one telling Pharaoh, basically, this is what God says you need to do so you'll be prepared for the famine. He's providing his wisdom. Verse 37. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. What's he going to say? He's obviously accepting the fact that what Joseph has told him about the dreams is true. And that's just an amazing thing right there. And I see God's hand in that as well. Of course, the cupbearer in his story had some influence there on Pharaoh when the cupbearer said, he told me what was going to happen, and it happened like he said. So Pharaoh, he's obviously very concerned and upset about these dreams. So he's ready to hear what they mean, and he's ready to get an answer for this famine that's coming. Verse 37, proposal seemed good to Pharaoh, to all his servants, and Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I've set you over all the land of Egypt. And, when I was reading that and studying that, I had a moment. I just had a moment. I've encouraged you time and time again to get into the stories, to put yourself in the stories in the place of those in the stories. What kind of words that must have been to Joseph's ears after all this time. We said last time that God had been preparing Joseph for this very moment, and that was true. This was his time. This is where God had been going with Joseph. Pharaoh even honors God. He says, God has given him this discerning spirit. Where else are we going to find somebody like this young man? Joseph is honored in the sight of Pharaoh. And I want us here to just step back and understand again, to think about our God. God doesn't take all the glory. He is letting Joseph have some of the glory here. He's like that. He loves us. He shares. He's a giver. He's not the kind of God that some people think he is. You know, just strict and detached, and you fall down and worship me or I'll slap you into hell. That's not him. God is amazing. From the pit to the palace in one day, in one morning, whenever it was. God can do things beyond our comprehension. We remember the scripture. Do we believe it? With God, all things are possible. And then we always like to say that yes, but, don't we? That's what we do. Yes, but. Look at that. Look at this. Forget the yes, but. With God, all things are possible. Let's read on. 42. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot. And they proclaimed before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission, no one will raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. Now get this. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. The blessings just keep coming. From a many-colored tunic to clothes of linen, fine linen. The New American Standard renders this the gold necklace. I know other translations have a gold necklace. But I wonder if it is the, meaning it was a necklace that symbolized power. I tend to think it was a symbol of authority. Bow the knee. I know in the service when I was in the Navy, and I know Bob was in the Army, we always had when the admiral came through or the captain came through, it was always make way, make way. You braced against the wall until he passed. And that's what this is for Joseph. Second in authority in all the land. Bow the knee. Get out of the way. He's coming through. What a turnaround. His new name means God speaks, he lives. Wow. His marriage places him in the nobility of Egypt. The priest's daughter. And remember when this started? Let's go back to Psalm 105 for just a moment. But when he began this journey, the cloak of many colors, he was 17. Now he's 30. 13 years. 13 years. Now, I'm not telling you young people that you're going to have to wait 13 years for something good to happen. But we understand that this is what Joseph had to endure for 13 years to get to the place where God wanted him to be so he could do what God wanted him to do. Basically, to save Israel, to continue the journey, God with his people, but also to save the known world at the time from the famine. Psalm 105:17, we read this in the very first lesson, if you recall. Let's start with 16. He called for a famine upon the land, and he broke the whole staff of bread. He sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They afflicted his feet with fetters. He himself was laid in irons until the time that his word came to pass. The word of the Lord tested him. And we would have to say that Joseph passed the test. Through all that he's gone through, and we're not going to rehearse it again, he knew God was with him, and he was very patient, and he made the best of the situation, and God blessed him, and God brought him out to this moment where he could save his people. What a story. What a God. Just another quick thought. We read in Luke 3:23 that Jesus was about the age of 30 when he began his ministry. I love the Bible. So many of these beautiful little truths that we have to connect the dots. Back to chapter 41, 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. Now, this is so important too. Now, let's keep reading and then we'll make a thought. During the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly, and we'll put in there just as God said. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance like the sand of the sea until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for, he said, God has made me forget all my trouble in all my father's household. He named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. All right, we want to note here, Joseph has been given this great honor. He's been made second in command in all of Egypt. No one can move unless Joseph says so, so to speak. But Joseph does not just go into his house and sit. What does it say? And Joseph went forth over all the land of Egypt. He got to work. Yes, he did. Sometimes we take a position with some kind of authority in it, and then we just sit and we don't do what we should do. We don't really lead and we don't really work. He took responsibility to do God's will to save the people's lives. You know, having knowledge, having plans, and having ideas are all necessary, and we've got to, know where we're going. Of course, God has got this planned out. God has made this plan. But then you have to do it. You have to work it. You have to get with it. It just won't happen by itself. And here again, this shows Joseph's great character. He understood all these things. God had prepared him through all this 13 years. He was over Potiphar's house. He was over all the prisoners in the jail. He knew to get things, you had to do things to get them done and to bring things to a good place. You had to work. Blessed with 2 sons, making to forget in fruitfulness. Certainly Joseph could not forget what had happened to him, what his brothers had done. But these blessings from God help ease some of that hurt. Yes, we've all had hurt, and we still have hurt. But God does supply some other things that will help ease it. It doesn't go away, but it's not as bad as it was at one time. But again, we note Joseph did not wallow in it, but he rose above it. He did the will of God. And what an example he is for us. Let's finish it up. 53. When the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, you shall do." When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. And again, we add, just as God had said he would do. Moving on, now Jacob saw there was grain in Egypt. Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" It was like, what are we going to do? We got no bread here. We got no grain. He said, "Behold, I've heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place so that we may live and not die." You know, God is not finished. He wants Israel in Egypt for his purposes. I can't answer all the reasons why. We see the end of the story later on. But we're going to just stop here for today. Lord willing, I want to go back to Genesis 15, though. Lord willing, next time is going to be the last one. We're going to compress the rest of it. You can read through the end, and we're going to see next time how revenge is bittersweet. Bittersweet. Genesis 15. You know, we've seen the dreams and we've seen the prophecies through the dreams, but this was all prophesied before. Did you remember that? To Abraham. Let's see, Abraham would have been the great-grandfather of Joseph. Is that right? Matt says yes. Yeah. Genesis 15:12, and, you know, this was before Abraham had Isaac. He says, you know, who's going to be my heir? You keep making me these promises to be God. Now, when the son, God has come down to him and is talking to him about, you know, you'll have a son and so forth and so on. He said, now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. It doesn't say he had a dream, but I'm kind of thinking this was part of a dream or a vision that Abram had. God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. God has been working long before this. He's working it all out. And I wonder, how does he do that? How does he get people to do what he wants them to do without violating their freedom of choice? And I cannot answer that question. I just can't. Maybe you can. So again, we say, what is God working in your life? Be aware that God is working in your life, and just be ready. Maybe your life is a little rough right now. God's with you. He'll take care of it. Maybe you're on the other end and things are going very well. Well, give God the glory and just be ready to help someone else. As we always say, often say, if you need prayer this morning, we're available. If you want to obey the gospel, we're available. You can come to talk with me after service, or Dawn, or Mike, or Rick, or Bob. We need to follow the Lord. If the words we've spoken this morning has touched your heart, please let God in, let the Word in, and let Him guide you to follow Him. God bless you.